Girl, you've got questions. Questions about your body and how to feel good in it, about your hormones and how to keep them in check. Questions about your sex life and your whole health. Can you imagine having a best girlfriend who was also a triple board certified OBGYN? A girlfriend doctor you could call and ask or tell her anything. Someone who could show you how to live any stage of life, before, during, or after menopause, in a big, bold, and beautiful way. Well, friends, I'm your girlfriend doctor. I believe you are meant to flourish and shine, to embrace life and awaken to all its possibilities. Let's get there together. Welcome to our show. Well, hello, Dr. Fahey. It's good to have you here on my podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's talk about broccoli sprouts. What made you interested in broccoli sprouts, and why should we eat them? Why should we be interested in them?
Yeah, so broccoli sprouts or extracts made from broccoli sprouts or seeds, or in fact the vegetable broccoli itself, are loaded with phytochemicals. All plants are loaded with phytochemicals. Why am I excited about broccoli sprouts in particular? They are a source of a compound called sulforaphane. It comes from a precursor called glucoraphanin that's present in the plant. And there's a conversion to convert it from this inactive precursor, glucoraphanin, to sulforaphane. And we can talk at length about how that conversion happens and where in the body it happens. But it turns out, and this was discovered about 30 years ago, that this compound sulforaphane is the most potent inducer of chemoprotective enzymes that's known, the most potent natural inducer. Of course, there are various synthetic drugs that will also induce these enzymes and their toxicities associated with them. So broccoli and broccoli sprouts also have various other phytochemicals. They act in a synergistic way with sulforaphane. We don't know everything there is to know about how those synergies work, of course, because phytochemicals are an extraordinarily large group of compounds. And we can unpack all of that, but the other point about broccoli sprouts and seeds is that they are much richer in this precursor of sulforaphane than market stage broccoli that you buy historically have bought at the supermarket.
So in other words, those really tiny little broccoli sprouts, like we've used to alfalfa sprouts, but now I'm putting broccoli sprouts in everything, and versus the full broccoli stalks. And
Right.
now to be able to break it down. So if we're eating broccoli sprouts, we have to digest it and break it down into this active phytochemical. Can all of us do that?
We can. We all have the bacteria in our guts, our microbiome, that contain some of those bacteria in our microbiome contain the enzyme that breaks down or converts, I should say, glucoraphanin into sulforaphane, which is the highly active compound. We all have different amounts of this enzyme in our guts, but we all do have it. And we and others now have done clinical studies to show that. However, if you eat raw broccoli or raw broccoli sprouts, you're also getting that enzyme which comes from the plant. When the plant's growing, be it a sprout or a market stage broccoli, it segregates the enzyme and its substrate, which is called glucoraphanin. Because this compound is produced, sulforaphane is very active, and it will bind with other organic stuff in the juice of the plant cell, if you will. But when you chew the broccoli, or when it's cut or mashed or ground up in a smoothie, then you allow glucoraphanin and myrosinase to contact each other and it's a very quick reaction. So you're delivering sulforaphane higher in the gastrointestinal tract, if you will, in the mouth and the esophagus and the stomach and so on. And it is absorbed. Sulforaphane is then absorbed more sooner. Obviously, if you wait until the food or the glucoraphanin gets down to the large intestine, you're waiting hours, many hours in most cases, and the absorption happens in a different part of the body then. And the third way you can affect this conversion is just by supplying exogenous or extra myrosinase, and this is something that's done with supplementation quite frequently. So dietary supplements that contain glucoraphanin, which is very stable, easy to extract from broccoli seeds or sprouts, is now in many cases being co-delivered with myrosinase, which is typically produced from mustard seed, but it can come from wasabi or daikon, Japanese radish, or any of a whole host of cruciferous plants.
So when we think of, okay, first of all, let's start simple. What exactly is sulforaphane?
It is
And
a
why should we
small,
care about it? Yeah.
yeah, it is a small molecule called a phytochemical that is a very potent, that the human body, our bodies, can use in various pathways, protective pathways that protect the body. And I'd love to dive into what some of them are. The list is actually quite long, but if you'll allow me, I'd like to define the sort of general class that sulforaphanes belong to first, and that's phytochemicals. So when you look at a food, you've got, what everybody thinks of, and historically what people think of when they look at the ingredient, the nutrition fact panel on a food, is you've got proteins, carbohydrates, fats, fiber, various vitamins. You can go to the depth of saturated versus unsaturated fat, etc., and minerals. That's the nutrition fact panel, and that is indeed the vast bulk of the mass of plant cells, of plants, animal tissue for that matter too. But then you've got collagen and a few other things. Phytochemicals aren't any of those. Phytochemicals are present in way less than 1% in most cases by weight of the plant, and they're small molecules, and they're the molecules that plants create. I mean, plants can't escape from attack. They don't have teeth. They can't run. So how do they defend themselves? With phytochemicals. So these phytochemicals are used for defense of the plants against predators that chew on them, against bacteria and fungi that will rot them. They're also used to color the plants. They're what make plants beautiful to us. They're what give them the vibrant colors, and they're what give plants their vibrant smells and tastes. So phytochemicals do all that. 25 years ago or so, the estimate, the sort of consensus among phytochemists, plant chemical people, if you will, was that there were at least 50,000 phytochemicals in the world of edible plants or plants. Now the consensus is up well over 1 million, probably more like 5 million, based on better detection techniques and so on. And so really, these are a huge category of small chemicals that do other stuff. And so the fact that the human body uses them to do other stuff is what we're talking about when we're talking about the mode of action of sulforaphane, for example.
Well, I first learned, again, when we think of phase 2 detoxification, we think methylation, sulfation, and glucuronidation. Where does this fit in?
Sulforaphane is the most, as I think I might have mentioned before, the most potent naturally occurring activator of the so-called NRF2 pathway, or NRF2. And this is the pathway that controls vast majority of those detoxification and antioxidant reactions. So to get a little bit granular, but I'm sure your audience will enjoy this, or I hope they will. And the NRF2 pathway refers to a DNA transcription factor, really, something that is in the cytoplasm. When sulforaphane enters a cell, it allows a change in configuration that allows this NRF2 molecule to go into the nucleus. It then sits on the DNA and affects the transcription of the DNA. So it affects the genes and the proteins, rather, that the DNA produces. And in that process, it affects a family or a suite of, suite is actually a better word for it, of about 300 to 500 detoxification and antioxidant proteins. Most of them are enzymes. Among them are all the enzymes, many of the enzymes involved in the glutathione biosynthetic pathway. This is the massively important antioxidant pathway that's endogenous to your body. That's responsible, for example, for participating in the detoxification of xenoestrogens, like phthalates, like bisphenol A, like polybromine diphenyl ethers. Sorry, what?
Parabens,
yeah. So, especially with BPA, this has been shown to be something that's directly affected by sulforaphane, because sulforaphane induces this NRF2 pathway to upregulate the detoxification enzymes that then in turn will deactivate BPA. Stepping aside from the estrogen metabolism pathway for a minute, we've also shown in clinical studies that this detoxification happens with a variety of air pollutants, also extremely important for those of us living in the human condition in the 21st century, right? Depending on where we live, it is more or less important, depending on how close we are to car exhaust or diesel exhaust or cigarette smokers. It can be really important. So this is a central pathway that sulforaphane affects. If you didn't ask this question, but I'll answer it in anticipation that you'd love for me to answer it.
I would.
Okay. Well, we'll see. You can cut it, right? I should ask: is this being recorded and edited, or are we live? Okay.
We're recorded.
Okay. So, in addition to this NRF2 pathway, which is really one of the probably the most important pathway that sulforaphane affects, it affects the anti-inflammatory response. This is primarily governed by the so-called NF-kappa B pathway, and it downregulates inflammation. It affects immune response activation. It affects it has direct antibiotic effect and actually direct and specific antiviral effect against certain potential pathogens or certain pathogens like Helicobacter pylori. In fact, my colleagues at Hopkins, I wasn't directly involved in this study, showed a few years ago it's effective against SARS-CoV-2 in vitro in mouse studies. That hasn't been carried over to human clinical trials yet. And it has a number of epigenetic effects. It's an HDAC or histone deacetylase inhibitor, and this affects the coverings of the chromosomes that allow the DNA to be read or not. It affects methylation. It affects the composition of the gut microbiome in a favorable way. And we've done some work on that that'll be published very, very soon. So you didn't ask me to talk about that, but I did anyway. Let me shut up and let you ask another question.
Oh, no, I love it because I've been using it, and I initially came across the Johns Hopkins research looking at the sulforaphane. We termed it SGS at the time. Now we're calling it glucoraphanin.
Glucoraphanin, yeah.
Glucoraphanin. And so I always know it for short as SGS.
That's okay.
Okay.
So glucoraphanin is the chemical name. We can get an even more complicated systemic name if you want, but the term SGS was used, and I used it in a research paper, I think, once, because it's descriptive. It's the glucosinolate that makes sulforaphane, but it's really, and it was used as a trade name. So scientifically, I'm sort of trained myself not to use that term, but we understand. We're on the same page.
We understand. We know we're talking about the same thing. And so I came across it and I had this, and the research and something about antiviral research potentially. And I had a patient with severe vaginal warts. And she had some really significant vaginal warts. And I was like, I'm going to have to laser her, but she needed time and to take off from school and to save money and get this done. I said, in the meantime, let's start. I've heard of this, product. So let's start this supplement. It was Oncoplex at the time, and methylated folate, and let's try this, and then come back in 2 months, and we'll do your pre-op for surgery. And I don't know where all that came from, but when she came back to see me, like there was nothing. There were no warts, no vulvovaginal warts. And again, it was the worst case I'd seen in my history. And so I was like, "What did you do?" And she said, "Dr. Anna, I did what you told me to do." I'm like, "Oh, well, that's a first. That's great." And that's what she had done. And through that time, she never, again, touch wood, didn't have any recurrence. We maintained her on a small dose, but I had loaded her up for those 2 months. I had recommended the higher doses of the supplementation during that time, and of course to clean up her diet and to pray and all those other good things that we do. And it healed her. It healed her. And that was so powerful. I started using in clients with dysplasia or abnormal paps, and I knew the studies of for breast and brain. And so I really feel like it is a foundational like supplement, definitely broccoli sprouts foundational in our diets. And so I want to ask you to go into a little bit of the research, because when you presented at Zymogen, you were talking about the importance on the brain, the benefits of the brain. And so I want to go into that a little bit too. Brain, breast, what are, if it works on all these pathways, got to have a very holistic benefit.
I think it does. So let's talk about that. I mean, certainly, your story about the vulvar warts reminds me. There's a study that I wanted to do with colleagues at the School of Public, and we never did it. We didn't get the funding, but that's we know some of this very specific targeted antibacterial activity that sulforaphane has. And we've done I've done a clinical study in Japan with Helicobacter, as I mentioned. We wanted to look at bacterial vaginitis, bacterial vaginosis in Bangladesh, where it's endemic. It's a huge problem. And we wanted to look at treatment with sulforaphane and with another compound, very closely related compound, actually, from moringa, which is something that's grown in Bangladesh, or can be grown there, as opposed to broccoli, which is not very common. But again, it's one of these isothiocyanates, very similar to sulforaphane. And we were talking about an oral supplementation also. But fast forward many years to a paper that has just actually been published, I guess in 2025. We had done a study with the dermatology group at Johns Hopkins, where we were looking to see if systemically taking, or orally taking sulforaphane or its precursor could have an effect on the skin. And the question there is, clearly, it goes systemically. We know that. We can talk about cancer prevention, and we will in a second. But can you actually get it, to the epithelial surfaces of the body? And hence, I'm thinking, it actually might have worked in BV. But we showed that it did. Not only that, with skin punch biopsies in the lower back or the upper buttocks, we showed increased induction of these protective enzymes and reduced expression of inflammation. So it's one of those studies where it wasn't the endpoint we were looking for. We were looking at erythema or sunburn, but we got a sort of bonus, and we saw these effects on the epithelial surfaces of the body. So your story that you just told is absolutely, I'm not surprised. I'm delighted, of course, but I'm not surprised. And there's starting to be some good science to support it, I think. So I lost track of. I didn't lose track of your question, but you.
Oh no! So the benefits further of, well, one is how much broccoli sprouts should we eat a day, and should anyone not eat them?
Yeah, I'm not aware that I shouldn't eat them. There is some controversy about really the dose, and there's some things we don't know about the dose. If you have a frank tumor, if you have cancer, and you are and you have a diagnosable tumor, because one of the things that inducing this NR2 pathway does is it enables cells to survive, oxidative insults. And so since tumors are fast-growing cells, there's a potential that you could actually be aiding their growth, or they're outcompeting, other cells. On the other hand, but yet there's a lot of evidence suggesting that this is not a concern at the doses obtained, in diets. Certainly, we should have a conversation about dose range, but I also want to mention that there is a list now that is something like 75 studies long of the synergies of sulforaphane and primarily drugs, but also other phytochemicals. And when you look at what these other drugs are, they're all cancer therapeutic, or almost all of them are cancer therapeutic drugs. And these studies have been done in animal models and cell models. There aren't good clinical studies yet. There need to be very desperately. But when you're talking about dozens and dozens of cancer drugs, cancer therapeutic drugs that sulforaphane synergizes with, what that means in sort of plain language is you can use less of the highly toxic cancer therapeutic drugs to achieve the same kill of cancer cells, to achieve the same endpoint. So you reduce the toxicity by co-delivering with sulforaphane. So, I mean, this is something that is in desperate need of clinical validation in people. I think it's a huge potential area for future clinical use, really. We all know about how nasty cancer therapy can be. No question about it. Anyway, to step back, and in particular, it's probably helpful to know for the female audience that you have. There's a lot of evidence that sulforaphane is helpful in preventing breast cancer, as well as treating it. Also, cervical cancer and ovarian cancer have been investigated with sulforaphane. No clinicals there, but studies with human cell lines and mouse cell lines and so forth. So I think cancer prevention and probably cancer treatment are in the future for it. What you wanted me to talk about? You wanted me to talk about some of the other.
Well, definitely neurocognitive benefits.
Yeah. What can I say? There are clearly neurocognitive benefits. There are studies in autism in schizophrenia, not weak studies, but evidence in Parkinson's, and certainly a lot of indications in the best models that there are of Alzheimer's studies that sulforaphane, reduces brain fog, enhances cognition, enhances scores on executive function and cognition tests. A lot of this, as I say, has been done with the backdrop of some frank condition, like one of the neurodevelopmental or neurodegenerative. It hasn't been done in a backdrop of perimenopausal conditions. It should be, but certainly there is a ton, to use a very technical term, a ton of anecdotal evidence of its efficacy in menopausal issues. In fact, so much so that a company by the name of Equilibria has come out with a product, I think they call it Daily Women's Hormone Balance, and it consists of Trubroc, just an extract of broccoli seeds. So it's glucoraphanin, the precursor of sulforaphane. I think they have pycnogenol and vitamin C and resveratrol in it. Or no, it's pycnogenol, I guess. Well, we can look it up, but it's primarily glucoraphanin, and this is come out to rave reviews. I talked to some of the women who have taken it. So it's being used, as I mentioned. We know that sulforaphane is effective in detoxifying of aminoestrogens. We know it supports estrogen metabolism. Of course, estrogen metabolism, I'm sure I know more expert on it than I am. So let me you explain estrogen metabolism if you want to here. But the anti-inflammatory sulforaphane also may play a crucial role in alleviating menopausal symptoms. So yeah, I'm trying to think. We know it has a favorable effect on gut, to the extent that gut health has been tied, or changes in the balance of critters in the gut microbiome have been tied to menopausal effects. There is the potential that there's a direct effect there. Also I think relates to menopausal effects. There's potent cytoprotective activity in ameliorating effect on liver damage. So with AFLD and NASH, which are chronic liver conditions, sulforaphane bolsters the detoxification in the livers. Liver detoxification is critical for estrogen metabolism. Sulforaphane offsets tissue damage due to type 2 diabetes. I've participated in a couple of clinical studies on diabetes. We mentioned cancer. We mentioned the neutralization of xenoestrogens, but the list is really quite extensive, and makes it not a panacea, not a cure-all, but I think the word you used was a full supplement. I think that's absolutely
I definitely
what it should
have,
be regarded as.
since that time, and then just being aware of the research, I put the Oncoplex plus myrocyronase in my Superwoman packs, called Superwoman for a reason. Like just one a day, right? Like just that daily protective foundational benefit. And also I use, like the Trubroc or sulforaphane in my shakes too, and my protein shakes. I just feel like this is part of hormone detoxification, liver support, and this, to support our antioxidant pathways. And for me, there's so much good research on it, really thanks to you and all the work that you've done, and your colleagues at Johns Hopkins and these scientific institutions. And there's many ways we can supplement, certainly. And so I want to talk about dosage too. We think, okay, brain health, breast health, skin health. I mean, wait, before we go there, Does it have a preventive effect on, because you did the work on the skin for melanomas?
We participated in a study at Pittsburgh that was published in, I don't know, 2017, I think, or thereabouts, and the study looked at not at melanoma but at atypical nevi, but the objective was to see if there was an effect on skin cancers, and we saw an effect, but let me just say I think the evidence is not clear. The evidence is not there. The work just hasn't been done. I'm sure familiar with the problems with doing clinical studies, and a lot of times, even with the best of intentions, you don't get the participation that you expected. You don't get compliance. You don't get recruitment. These studies are extremely expensive, and sometimes you're left wanting to repeat the study but not being able. So, short answer, I guess you asked about melanomas, right? Yeah. I think clinical evidence yet, but certainly evidence against cell line evidence, and there's evidence in mouse studies, and this is using immunocompromised mice. We did a number of those studies ourselves. So we found reduction in the number of tumors and the tumor burden on mice when treated with sulforaphane. It needs to be done in humans. Yeah. But that again gets to the question of, should it be a foundational supplement? Yes. Are you ever going to be able to prove to yourself as a subject or a patient, as a patient, or you as a physician ever going to be able to prove that taking a sulforaphane supplement kept someone from getting cancer? No, obviously you can't do that. Does that matter? Sure, if you're trying to add up a scorecard, but it certainly allows you to go to sleep at night thinking you've helped people, at least statistically on a population basis. It works. If you help that individual, am I going to know if I live to 100 cancer-free? Am I going to know that was because I take supplement sulforaphane and eat my fruits and veggies? I'll never know, but at that point, I hopefully won't need to know. I'll have made it. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's powerful. And then we think with if we're eating broccoli sprouts, or other cruciferous vegetables too. Maca is a cruciferous, and that strong phytochemical combination. But if we're eating specifically broccoli sprouts, because I just love them and they're so easy to put into everything, should it be 1 cup a day, 2 cups a day? And if we're supplement, what dosage do we want to look at?
Yeah. The answer to that is extremely complicated, but I'll give you a glib answer and then go back and go into some detail if I may. I eat 1 to 2 cups of broccoli sprouts, say 5 times a week, not every day, but times more. I eat a huge serving of broccoli when we have broccoli. Take a prophylactic, if you will, or a foundational supplement every day. Doesn't really have to be every day. We think every other day, perhaps every 3 days. And the reason for that is because if you look at this detoxification and antioxidant function, it's not antioxidant function like vitamin C oxidant that goes into the bloodstream and then is used up, and what's not used up is passed in the urine, and this all happened quickly. Well, that's the same thing that to induce these protective pathways. And those pathways, since they're enzymes, stay around and stay active for days to a week or two. When you sort of superimpose all of these detoxification pathways and look at the squint your eyes and global effect, the effect is indirect antioxidant, but it lasts for quite a long time. So I it's a sort of dogmatic statement saying that you really only need to focus on getting sulforaphane every 2 to 3 days. However, if you're talking about supplementing, almost all of us would prefer a capsule or a gel cap or a smoothie or whatever every day. I mean, it's a routine that if you don't get into doing it daily, a lot of times you don't get in. Having to stagger pills every 2 or 3 days just doesn't work for a lot of people. And we also know that and this is based on studies we did in China, 3 days of daily dosing of glucoraphanin, this was Truebrock, the precursor, does not fit this protective system. So you don't wear it out, you don't overwhelm it. So
you don't create a negative feedback loop.
Correct. So my advice is just do it every day. And does it matter if you miss your, if you're someone who's eating broccoli or broccoli sprouts? God bless you. Does it matter if you don't have it every day? No, I don't think it does. But in terms of supplements, just take it every day as eat. In terms of what you eat.
Well, milligram dosage on the supplement first.
Yeah. On most supplement bottles, and I don't study them, frankly, but it's 30 to 50 mils of glucoraphanin or Truebrock a day. I think that's reasonable, and it's derived from some of our very earliest work, where when we did our first clinical trials, we said, what's the dose? How much should we give? Because then we were giving purified sulforaphane to mice and to cell cultures, but when we did our first clinical studies, the question was, what's reasonable and what's safe? The way we approached it is we looked at all the epidemiology, and we looked at some of the Haynes studies and some other epidemiology that said, this is sort of what low broccoli eaters eat, and this is what high or emphatic eaters eat. There's a huge range, of course. And then at the time, this has actually gone back to late 70s. There were epidemiologic studies that said people who ate about 2 servings per day of broccoli or of cruciferous vegetables, or several different studies, had about a 50% reduction in the risk of cancer. And the cancers they looked at were bladder cancer, breast cancer, I believe prostate cancer. And so the 78 study was with colorectal cancer, and then there was a meta-analysis done on colorectal cancer. And the numbers keep coming through at 2 servings a day for a 50% reduction in risk. So in our clinical trials, we did the math, we did the calculation, we back calculated and said, okay, split that range of high to low broccoli eaters and pick a sort of average number. We had done extensive work characterizing glucoraphanin in broccoli at the time, and we were able to back it into a dose that has sort of rippled through the decades, for better or for worse, and the supplement makers have sort of settled on that dose. A couple of interesting facts that go along with that. One is that when one does a clinical study that is effective, or positive rather, it gives a positive result, reach the endpoint you're looking for. If you want to do a follow-up study, what usually happens is people, whether it's the same group or a different group, target a similar dose because they don't want to risk not seeing an effect. So they're not going to use much less, and they might not get permission to use a much higher dose because the ethics boards will say, well, look at this study, it worked with dose X. Why do you want to use 3X? So it's sort of a combination of professional laziness maybe and convenience and really not wanting to have a failed study. So as studies are more and more studies are done, they tend to cluster around the dose that worked for someone in a study. Having said that, we and others have done a few dose escalation studies. And so we can, and we've certainly done safety studies. And so we can say that doses much, much higher, five to maybe even 10 times higher than what's recommended by most supplement manufacturers is going to be safe. Is it going to be more effective? I don't know. Obviously, when you reach some number, it's going to have side effects like gastrointestinal effects. And yeah, there is a hormetic effect with sulforaphane, meaning there's a sweet spot. It's a U-shaped curve. So too little has no effect. Too much may not have a preventive effect, but it may have a therapeutic effect. And that's a whole, you may have had seminars on that. You may have had webinars or podcasts on that, but it's fast. I don't have time to get into it now.
It's the nuances. But when we look at, and just think of like a call to action to our audience, if you can leave, because this topic, the glucoraphins or SGS, and the glucoraphan plus myrocyronase has so many like foundational benefits, especially women midlife and beyond, and men, same thing.
Yeah.
That like for me, it's a given. And when we're adding broccoli sprouts into our diet, it's a given. And doing this and having some type of safety and confidence, but plus know there's been research in this area. If you could leave our listeners with one big takeaway about sulforaphane and phytochemicals for healthy aging, what would it be, Dr. Fahey?
Whoa. I think for health aging, I would give more than one recommendation, but I would embody.
Please.
Do that? You give me more than one?
Yes. As many as you want. I'm all ears. I've been following your research.
This goes back to things that Michael Pollan and Marion Nestle have said in their books and so on. But certainly eat a plant-forward diet. Not necessarily vegetarian, but it certainly can be. Eat a lot of plants. Eat a variety of plants, and I would say certainly eat cruciferous vegetables as part of that varied diet. Why varied? Because that's helpful for the microbiome. It keeps supporting a diversity of bugs, which is important. It provides a diversity of phytochemicals, which is extremely important. And avoid ultra-processed foods. We could have another 3-hour conversation about that, certainly. But I say avoid them, and avoid, in doing that, you're going to be avoiding a lot of advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, which are absolutely damaging to your health and health span and well-being. Avoid charred meats. I think that's pretty well known. Cigarettes and so on. And move. Get off your butt and move. So, I mean, that's the sort of foundational advice. And I included sulforaphane in there because I said, definitely eat cruciferous vegetables. And then finally, many people don't like cruciferous vegetables or don't like broccoli. Supplement with a foundational supplement, and there are many of them. And you can make those recommendations. We those of us who talk with supplement companies, which ones are good and which ones aren't.
Well, you have a few companies you worked with too. If you want to list them, that's great, and then we can trust them.
I do, and maybe you can put up their websites on the show. But I co-founded Brassica Protection Products, which makes a compound, makes an extract of broccoli seeds that they call True Broc. That's the trade name. It is just a very glucoraphanin-rich hot water extract of broccoli seeds, and that True Broc is used by many of the premier supplement companies. So certainly, I would look for that in a supplement. I also work I also advise. I don't work for. I advise a company called Food Nerd that makes extremely unprocessed baby and infant foods, and they use broccoli sprouts in their products. I advise a company called PhytoSmart that produces omega-3 DHA in microalgae, and they've combined that with broccoli sprouts. And I advise a company called the Sprouting Company, which makes sprouting devices, kits, and sells the broccoli's high glucoraphanin broccoli seeds actually that can be used in those sprouting kits. But that gets me to a critical additional thing that I'd like to say to any user who wants to take their health by the throat and shake it and have some control over their destiny. Growing sprouts is not difficult. It used to be a pain, when I started in the 70s as a sort of hippy dippy thing. You would use mason jars, and you would use gauze, or you would use window screens on the top and rubber bands, and getting sproutable seeds was difficult. I now use the kit that the Sprouting Company makes. It's fantastic. It takes all the guesswork and the pain out of sprouting. It just makes it very straightforward.
Okay, which one is that? Because I want that pain out of sprouting kit.
Yeah, it's called the Sprouting Company, and the kit. I mean, it's got something that puts the jar on an incline. The jar doesn't have any lips in it, so the water drains out. The screen is not like a window screen. It's a fabulous, well-designed screen. And all you do is you put the seeds in the thing, and you soak for overnight, and then you rinse twice a day or 3 times a day. Invert the jar, and after 4 or 5 days, you've got a jar full of sprouts: lentils, alfalfa, clover, radish, broccoli. They supply the seeds. A lot of what I used before they came along with this device was I used a big mason jar, and you can buy screw-on screens, but then you got to figure out how to, put it on a dish rack next to the sink. It's so easy to grow sprouts and have it. I actually eat just a huge mixed sprouts, throw on it, walnuts, cranberries, cut up tomato, etc., and that's it. And throw some protein on a can of sardines or anchovies for omega-3s. If you're not a vegetarian or pescatarian, throw on some bacon for that matter. I recommend it, but any sources of protein that you can put on. Although when you grow lentil sprouts or chickpea sprout, mung bean, you're getting a so. I guess I can't should go out and sprout, because we know that the vast majority of Americans don't eat sprouts and make them themselves. But in the grocery store and find out, are all slimy and have good shelf life in the grocery store, and they just don't last. They're a small facing in most grocery stores, because the produce manager bummed out, because they have to. It's called the shrink in the grocery business. They have to throw out at least half of the sprouts because they go bad. When yourself, first of all, you have kind of all, you grow them, you take them, put it in the refrigerator, and it's good for a week or two. And if it starts, you've got another batch coming. It's very easy to be careful trying to get the whole world to grow sprouts because we know that won't happen, but more people
Hey,
should.
but my audience is different. We have our own Blue Zone community here in the Girlfriend Doctor community. We're actively looking at these longevity factors. I'm gonna I just looked it up. I'm gonna get this. I'm gonna connect with the sprouting company right now and get one for myself. And I will show my audience by the time we air this episode my beautiful sprouts. So I'm looking forward to
Excellent.
that. And yeah, thank you for all your research. And you didn't mention, because you don't know yet, but that you'll be advising me too on my next really key life-changing women's health supplement with True Brock or glucoraphanin in it. So keep
Awesome.
healthy warning.
Well, that sounds great. I appreciate the warning, and I look forward to the task. We should also mention that for people who are supplementing, and of course most of us do or may do, it is critical to get decent supplements. And how do you know if it's well? You can get recommendations from someone like you, but if you're naively going into this and trying to get them on Amazon, which I don't recommend, but if you're buying them, make sure that the company that's selling them has done third-party testing. In particular, NSF is one of the NSF certification is done for athletes to make sure there's no adulteration. When USP is another certification group, and it's another one I'm missing.
GMP.
Consumer Lab is the other one. But yeah, you want to make sure that they were made with good manufacturing practices. You want to make sure that third parties have tested for purity and for potency, for absence of contamination. You don't want to take a apparently wonderful supplement and find out that's got RE in it. You don't want bacterial contamination. So
I lost Dr. Fahey's internet just at the conclusion, but the key thing is quality supplements. You can look at my bottles and containers and see those third-party testing verifications. And it's so important for me because, number one, my children, now my grandchildren, I'm really conscientious of what I create for me and for my family and for all of you. So that's really important. And I would just say this is an incredible episode because getting in touch with some of the leading scientists in the world is really a passion project for me, especially as I've seen the clinical utilization and how it can really benefit us. And again, we want to help and do no harm. And that's the most important thing. It is what we can do on a daily basis, especially when we look at phytochemical rich foods like broccoli sprouts that you can sprout yourself. And these can switch on our body's own protective systems. That's key. So remember, this isn't about complicated science. It's about small daily choices that protect your cells, balance your hormones, and set you up for a long, vibrant life. If you want to dive deeper into the research, visit jedfahey.com to explore his research, resources, and practical tips, and for bringing these discoveries into your own kitchen. And as always, thank you for being part of this community. And you can see the research behind my formulations and also the formulations that I trust. I look for this research. I look for the clinical correlations and where I can utilize them to help my patients and help me and my family as well. So Oncoplex plus myrocyronase is the glucoraphanin. Let's see why I call it SGS. Glucoraphanin. It helps with sulfation detoxification pathways, plus it combines the myrocyronase. It's part of the Superwoman packs to support us daily and to help with healthy skin, breast, brain, and pap smear and all that good stuff. That's critical. And maybe some insulin sensitivity too. So I think, again, and cancer prevention, the research is still in need to go deeper into clinical studies and trials. But I can tell you the experience has been valid enough and good enough for me to include it in my Superwoman packets, and also into my shakes, like keto-green shake. My keto-green protein shake has it in it as well to support sulfation, glucuronidation, methylation. Those are combined in the multivitamin and super antioxidant components that I put in there. So that's why it's comprehensive. And remember just to stay nourished, stay connected, and you were made for vitality and you are worth it. So like me, join me in sprouting. Until our next time, I so look forward to our conversation. Share this information. Check out the resources. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel at The Girlfriend Doctor. We're really working on planning some great live events to that YouTube channel. So if you subscribe and click to get notifications, you will be notified right away when I'm going live. So it'll be some fun events that I've got coming up. I look forward till next time. All right. God bless.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Girlfriend Doctor podcast. Check out all the links below for more.